Your roadmap to the latest in auto? Welcome to Highway Herald. For decades, the US and Canada weren't just neighbors. They were partners, running one of the world's tightest economic pit crews. Cross-border supply chains, energy trade, and tourism kept both economies firing on all cylinders. But in 2025, that smooth ride hit turbulence. Trade disputes, tariffs, and fiery political rhetoric have rattled the alliance, sparking Buy Canadian campaigns, cooling tourism, and forcing diversification. Buckle up as we break down how US pressure is redlining Canada's economy and reshaping its future. Border breakdown. Tourism skids into decline. For decades, Canadians were America's most dependable visitors, from retirees flocking to Florida's golf courses to families shopping in border cities like Buffalo and Detroit. But in 2025, that reliable engine stalled. Canadian travel to the US has declined for 7 straight months, with July showing a steep 36.9% drop in car trips and a 25.8% plunge in flights compared to last year. This isn't a blip. It reflects growing resentment. Many Canadians are boycotting US travel, spurred by tariff wars, sharp rhetoric from President Trump, and even talk of annexation. A weaker Canadian dollar and lagging wages only add to the slowdown, pushing families to either stay home or vacation overseas instead. In a historic reversal, more Americans are now driving into Canada than Canadians heading south, 1.8 million versus 1.7 million in July. The fallout is already hitting US states like Florida, Arizona, and New York, where hotels, restaurants, and tourist hotspots once reliant on Canadian dollars are facing sharp revenue losses. But collapsing tourism is only the first crack in this relationship, because at the heart of the storm lies an even bigger blow: tariffs. Tariff turbulence, 35% walls and transshipment penalties. At the core of the dispute are tariffs, and 2025 brought a major escalation. On August 1st, President Trump raised duties on Canadian imports from 25% to 35%, citing national security and fentanyl trafficking, a claim Canada dismissed as baseless. Washington also slapped a 40% duty on rerouted goods shipped through third countries, shutting off one of Canada's last workarounds. These measures stack atop existing heavy tariffs: 50% on steel and aluminum, 25% on autos and parts. Because these aren't protected by USMCA exemptions, Canada's industrial backbone is left highly vulnerable. Automakers and manufacturers on both sides of the border now face surging costs, disrupted supply chains, and stalled investment. But the impact isn't one-sided. US manufacturers dependent on Canadian materials are absorbing higher input costs, which are passed to consumers. Cars, construction, and appliances are all more expensive. Analysts warn household costs could rise $2,400 a year, showing how tariffs meant to punish Canada are backfiring on Americans. And while tariffs are rattling the system, Canada isn't standing still. It's actively scouting new markets and shifting gears toward diversification. Before we delve deeper, we'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to Highway Herald. Your support fuels our passion to bring you the latest auto updates, trade shifts, and deep dive analysis every week. New trade horizons. Canada diversifies the engine. For more than a century, Canada's economy leaned almost entirely on the US, with nearly 80% of exports flowing south like torque through a gearbox. But 2025 has forced a change of course. With tariffs piling up and political rhetoric souring, Ottawa is accelerating into diversification, scouting new global markets at full throttle. The numbers highlight the shift. Between May 2024 and May 2025, Canada's export share to the US fell from 78% to 68%, the lowest outside pandemic years. Meanwhile, exports elsewhere surged. Gold shipments to the UK jumped 473%, energy sales to Singapore climbed, and aluminum exports to Italy gained traction. This pivot has already narrowed Canada's trade deficit from $7.6 billion in April to $5.9 billion in May, thanks largely to booming mineral and gold exports. Still, it's no clean break. Proximity, infrastructure, and supply chains bind Canada to the US for years to come. Yet the message is clear. Reliance on one neighbor is too risky, and global partners are fueling Canada's shift. But diversification abroad is only half the story. At home, Canadians are rallying together in ways that are reshaping the economy from within. Homegrown momentum, Buy Canadian, USMCA shields, and domestic muscle. As Canada faces tariff pressure abroad, a new kind of horsepower is emerging at home. The once symbolic Buy Canadian movement has gone mainstream, fueled by frustration with US tariffs and rhetoric. Surveys show 67% of Canadians now avoid US goods, reshaping demand and giving local producers a boost. Businesses are also retooling to protect what trade remains. The USMCA exemption, which shields goods meeting strict rules of origin, has become vital. Before the dispute, only half of exports qualified. By mid-2025, compliance rose to 2/3, with projections of 90% by year's end. The adjustments are costly but keep doors open to US markets. Domestically, Ottawa is pushing to dismantle interprovincial trade barriers, reforms that could add up to $200 billion annually to GDP. Meanwhile, energy remains a stronghold, with Canada still a key supplier to the US, even as leaders pivot toward Europe and Asia. Together, consumer patriotism and institutional reform signal a turning point. Tariffs may sting, but they're driving new Canadian self-reliance. And while consumers and businesses do their part, the ultimate battlefront lies in politics, and the road ahead could reshape the entire US-Canada relationship. Political crossroads, pushback, polls, and the uncertain road ahead. Politics has become the decisive battlefield in the US-Canada trade clash. Since talks on a new pact collapsed in July 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney has doubled down on resilience, diversification, and sovereignty, insisting Canada will not trade independence for short-term relief. The public is firmly behind him. 91% support reducing US reliance, 68% say their opinion of America has worsened, and majorities vow to avoid US travel and products. This marks a cultural shift as Canadians distance their identity from automatic alignment with Washington. Meanwhile, the US is pursuing a strategy of deliberate unpredictability. The hike to 35% tariffs, justified at times by fentanyl, dairy, or defense disputes, represents what analysts call a floating rationale, keeping Canada permanently off balance. The next critical moment looms in 2026, when the USMCA's sunset review could either renew or collapse the trade pact, leaving businesses in chaos. Still, Canada's counterpunch is sharpening. Retaliatory tariffs, diversification, and domestic unity suggest it's learning not just to endure, but to overtake. Verdict: from shock to self-reliance. Canada's 2025 journey through this tariff war has been turbulent, but from the grind of tariffs and travel boycotts emerges a new storyline. Businesses are diversifying exports, USMCA compliance is climbing, policymakers are dismantling barriers at home, and consumers are proudly choosing Canadian products. The nation is actively reshaping its economic destiny. Challenges remain. Entrenched supply chains, US market pull, and political turbulence still loom. Yet Canada is no longer passively reacting. It is recalibrating, redefining, and reclaiming control of its future. Painful as it is, this crisis may spark one of the strongest eras of Canadian renewal. Before we wrap up, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Can the Buy Canadian movement truly replace US imports long-term, or will costs undermine it? How do you see the 2026 USMCA review playing out? Renewal, renegotiation, or collapse? Will US tariffs ultimately backfire on American consumers more than Canadian exporters? Drop your thoughts below. Your perspectives drive these discussions forward. And don't forget, subscribe to Highway Herald so you never miss the latest vehicle updates, trade shifts, and deep dive analysis into the forces reshaping our automotive and economic world. Thanks for watching and see you next time. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's more exciting and informative content waiting for you.